Hello and welcome back to Boulder Bookstore and our YouTube channel. My name is Julia and happy Halloween. I'm here to talk to you about horror novels. This was a hard video for me to put together. I am a horror fan, but I'm also a very picky horror fan. So I spent a long time kind of expanding and contracting this list, trying to figure out what books I wanted to recommend to you in the horror genre. I struggled because I feel like the horror genre is one of those things that kind of flows in between other genres. I think that mystery and thriller have elements. There can be sci-fi that have thriller or have horror elements. And I think a lot of people, when something is labeled horror, they might shy away from it thinking that it's not for them. When, if you read a lot of mystery novels, there are horror elements in those mystery novels. So you might find yourself enjoying things that are labeled horror that you might not expect. There's some classics that you've heard of, I'm sure, some newer other things that maybe you haven't heard of, and I also, as I've been enjoying doing with some of my videos, have two books that they're on my to-read list that I'm excited to read this Halloween holiday season. So let's get started. First, as I've already expressed on this channel, I am a Stephen King fan. He's not for everybody, but I am a really big fan of his. So I picked The Shining. It's a classic. It's set in Colorado, so that seemed like a perfect fit. It was also the first Stephen King I ever read. It was one of the first horror novels I had ever read. And I would say if you have only seen the Stanley Kubrick movie, which I do like, don't get me wrong, I feel like the book has a lot more depth to it. The way that Jack Nicholson portrayed Jack Torrance in the movie, he basically seems insane the entire time. In this, it's more about, there's more of a metaphor of addiction and like a struggling family and kind of a growing level of insanity throughout the book. One of the things I really love about Stephen King is his character development, the internal lives of his characters, which doesn't usually come across super well on film. The Shining is one of my favorites. It was, like I said, one of the first horror novels I ever read. So I would highly recommend it for the holidays, I keep saying holiday season, for the Halloween season, if you're, interested in exploring a horror novel. Next up, I have The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson is by far one of my favorite authors. I absolutely adore her. If you saw the Netflix show that came out, I think, a couple of years ago, The Haunting of Hill House, this bears almost no resemblance to the TV show. I adored the TV show. I think it's a masterpiece, but this is a very different story. They kind of used elements of the novel in the show, but they're very different. This has probably one of the best opening paragraphs of literature. If you pick this up, read that first paragraph. If that takes you, read this book. It's about a haunted house. It's about a young girl who's trying to find her way in the world after her mother dies, goes to a haunted house with a professor as an experiment to try and uncover ghosts in the house. I don't want to give anything away because it's really masterfully done. It's a beautiful story. So next up, a little bit more contemporary, is Bird Box by Josh Malerman. Again, there was a Netflix movie. The Netflix movie was fine, but I feel like there's something about the plot of this book that really is not captured by something in a visual medium. I think it really needed to be, it is a novel. It needed to be that way. It was one of the first novels in a long time when I read this that really, really spooked me. But it also was so engaging that I kept reading even though it was spooking me. So the basic plot is that something has happened. People are seeing something and committing acts of violence or killing. They're going crazy, basically. And so all the survivors, basically, whenever they leave the house or do anything, they have to be blindfolded when they do it. Because if they see whatever it is that people are seeing, people don't know if it's a creature, they don't know what it is. If you see it, if you see this thing, you go crazy. And so it follows the main character, Mallory, in her journey to survive in this, this apocalypse, basically. Really fascinating story, really well done. I think the book is better than the movie, if you saw the movie, which I think a lot of people did. There's also a sequel called Mallory that just came out a couple of weeks ago. I also really enjoyed this one. I didn't think it was as scary, but it's dealing with kind of the aftermath of kind of this catastrophic event. It takes place quite a few years later. People have been living this way, you know, being blindfolded while they do everything for many, many years. And so I read this during the height of the pandemic when people were starting to get tired of taking all these precautions. And the plot of this really resonated with that feeling of like being tired of having to be so cautious and so careful all of the time, and like the repercussions of that or the mentalities around that. So I thought that connection was really, really interesting. I think Bird Box is a better book, but this also had some really strong elements too. And then last up for my recommendations is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. Now this maybe would be more considered a sci-fi, but it definitely has elements that push it into a horror genre as well. The main plot is that something has happened in this area. They call it Area X. The area has been cut off from civilization for decades, and scientists have been putting out exploratory groups into this area for years, and nobody ever comes back. They're only getting like bits and pieces of what's happening in this area, but they don't really know what's happening. And so the main character, her husband, was part of the last group, and he was the first person to ever come back, and he's changed. He's a totally different person. And so in order to figure out what happened to him, she joins the next exploration into this area. It's about genetic manipulation. The way that it's written is sort of mysterious. It falls into what a lot of people call weird fiction, but it's vague but creepy and beautifully written. There was also a movie by the same name that a lot of it is the same, but it kind of spans. It's a trilogy of books, and so they take elements of all three books and make it into one movie. But it's the area. What's happening in the area is both disturbing and beautiful, and you never really get full answers, which is kind of maybe a struggle for some people, but also really interesting. So if you like sci-fi, give this a shot. Give Annihilation a shot. And then lastly, I have two books that are on my to-read shelf. First off is Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. Stephen Graham Jones is a local author. Everybody in the store is a big fan. He's a really great guy. This is his newest novella. It's very short, which is very different than the other book I'm going to recommend, so that'll be fun. Basically about a mannequin that is being used in a prank. It comes to life and starts murdering people. Sounds super fun. Kind of reminds me of the R.L. Stine books that I read as a kid, probably a grown-up version of the R.L. Stine mannequin books. Sounds like it's got some dark humor to it. Really excited about that, as we are fans of Stephen Graham Jones. And last up is Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. This just came out a few weeks ago, or fairly recently, and this looks like another kind of darkly humorous horror gothic novel that I probably is right where I'm going to be this time of year. Maybe not something super scary, but has a little humor to it. It's about a original horror comedy centered around a cursed New England boarding school for girls. There's queer feminist history, haunted and cursed institutions. It seems like it's going to be a super fun read, but also with a lot of those horror elements. So I'm super excited to read this one. So those are my recommendations for you today. I hope you found something you were excited to read as well if you're interested in dabbling in horror. And if you need more recommendations, I included a link in the description that a couple years back, NPR put out a list of the 100 best horror novels. And so that's another great resource if you're looking for something to read. They break it down by different genres or different main elements, like, you know, monsters versus haunted houses, things like that. So that's another great resource. So hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying what we're doing here, and we'll see you in the next one. Happy Halloween!